The Logos War Saga by William L. Weaver, Ph.D. Read by Google Gemini for Workspace. Persuader Voice. Book 1. The Great Unraveling. Chapter 2. The Annex. The heavy fire door swung shut behind him, the clang of its locking mechanism a sound of finality. The sterile silence of the university was gone, replaced by the vibrant, living hum of the annex. Jaren took a deep breath. The air, a familiar cocktail of ozone from an overworked power supply, the bitter tang of stale coffee, and the clean, cold scent of liquid nitrogen. This was his world, a place of controlled chaos, of emergence. Unlike Finch's office, nothing here was static. Everything was in a state of becoming. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, the tension from his meeting with Finch slowly beginning to uncoil. The anger was still there, a hard knot in his gut, but here it could be transmuted into fuel. He walked past a whiteboard so layered with equations it had become a gray smear of forgotten ideas, the ghosts of 100 different lines of inquiry. On a workbench, a half-assembled apparatus of glass tubes and copper wiring sat next to a 3D printer that was slowly extruding a complex, fractal-shaped component. This was a lab where physics, chemistry, and computer science were not separate disciplines, but different words in the same language. He sat down at the console, the worn leather of the chair a familiar comfort. The main screen displayed a slowly rotating visualization of the cosmic microwave background, a constant, low-level analysis chugging away in the background. It was this persistent, months-long search that had yielded the first hints of the pattern. Thermal load on Core Cluster 7 is exceeding optimal parameters. A new line of text appeared, interrupting the data stream. Efficiency will degrade by 12% within the hour if current analysis continues. Jaren swore under his breath. The system was already running at its limit, and it wasn't even the deep dive he was now determined to perform. The custom cooling system he'd designed was starting to buckle under the strain. The problem wasn't the liquid nitrogen, it was the thermal transfer. He needed a better heatsink for that specific cluster, something with a higher thermal conductivity and a more complex surface area. He had the design, a delicate, thin structure he'd modeled weeks ago, but the material he needed was a rare earth-doped ceramic, a substance so specialized the university purchasing department would laugh his request form out of the building. He stood and stared at the humming racks of echo, a frown creasing his brow. Finch wanted him to focus on the superconductors. Fine. He would. He grabbed a small toolkit and a pair of heavy-duty work gloves, then headed back to the fire door. The university's e-waste depot was 3 buildings over, a graveyard of discarded technology that he had come to know as his own personal mine. He moved through the late afternoon shadows of the campus, a ghost in his own academic machine. The depot was a wire-fenced cage behind the engineering building, filled with overflowing bins of obsolete computers, tangled nests of cables, and the hulking carcasses of old lab equipment. To most, it was junk. To Jaren, it was a treasure trove of raw materials. He found what he was looking for in a bin near the back, a decommissioned signal amplifier from a defunct radio astronomy project, a relic from the 90s. He hefted the heavy metal box onto a clear patch of concrete and went to work. With the practiced efficiency of a master craftsman, he disassembled the unit. His hands, which could dance across a keyboard or sketch out elegant tensor equations, were just as comfortable with a socket wrench and a pair of wire cutters. He bypassed the main power supply, carefully discharged the capacitors, and worked his way into the core of the machine. And there it was, a small, unassuming ceramic plate, about the size of his palm, laced with faint, silvery lines. Yttrium barium copper oxide, the very heart of his superconductor research, and the perfect base material for the heatsink he needed. He expertly extracted the plate, tucking it into a pocket of his jacket. As he stood up, brushing the dust from his jeans, he felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Finch and the board were impressed with his material science work. They had no idea it was being funded by their own garbage. Back in the annex, Jaren placed the ceramic plate on his workbench under the bright, focused light of a magnifier lamp. The silvery lines of the yttrium doping were faint, almost ghostly. He would need to carefully mill it into the fractal shape he'd designed, a process that would take hours of painstaking work with a microlathe. He was so absorbed in planning the first cut that he didn't hear the fire door hiss open behind him. "Bruh, it smells like a fried circuit board in here." Jaren jumped, startled. It was Ben Carter, the same grad student from the hallway, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Brought you a peace offering," Ben said, setting one of the cups on a rare, clear spot on the bench. "Figured you could use it after the run-in with Finch. You look like you were about to go supernova." "Thanks, Ben," Jaren said, genuinely touched but also annoyed at the intrusion. He took a sip of the coffee. It was burnt, but it was hot. Ben peered at the ceramic plate under the lamp. "What's that? More of your superconductor stuff?" "Part of it," Jaren said, deciding to try one more time. Maybe if he framed it differently, Ben would get it. "It's for the cooling system. Echo's running a deep analysis, and I need to keep the core from melting." "Right, the patterns," Ben said, his tone a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "Seriously, what are you even looking for? A message from God?" "Not a message," Jaren said, turning to face him, his frustration from the day boiling over. "A grammar. A set of rules. Think of it this way. We know the alphabet. Quarks, leptons, bosons. We know some of the words. Protons, atoms, molecules. But we've been trying to understand the story by just staring at the letters. I think there's a syntax, a set of grammatical rules, that governs how the letters can be combined. Echo found a recurring sentence structure in the cosmic background radiation. I'm just trying to figure out what it says." He watched Ben's face, hoping to see a spark of understanding, of excitement. Instead, he saw the same polite, vacant look from the hallway. Ben's eyes glazed over, his mind clearly picturing his own comfortable, predictable simulations of quark-gluon plasma. "Huh," Ben said, taking a long sip of his coffee. "A grammar for the universe. That's a hell of a metaphor." He clapped Jaren on the shoulder, the same dismissive gesture as before. "Well, don't let me keep you from your linguistics. Just try not to burn the building down, okay?" Ben turned and left, the fire door hissing shut behind him, leaving Jaren alone once more in the humming darkness. The coffee suddenly tasted even more bitter. It wasn't just the old guard like Finch. It was everyone. They were all content to read the same page of the book over and over again, while he was trying to prove the book had an author. He turned back to the workbench. The frustration from Finch, the dismissal from Ben, it all curdled into a single point of diamond-hard resolve. He picked up a pair of calipers and began to measure the ceramic plate. If no one else would listen, he would just have to get a result so loud they couldn't ignore it. The next hours were a blur of focused, furious creation. Jaren slipped into a state of pure flow, the outside world and its disappointments fading away until there was only the work. The high-pitched whine of the microlathe filled the annex as he meticulously carved the scavenged ceramic into the intricate, fractal shape of his design. Tiny sparks flew, each one a miniature star against the dark backdrop of the lab. He worked with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of an artist, his hands steady, his mind a quiet, focused engine. This was where he was most himself, not in the abstract world of theory, but in the tangible act of making. Finally, it was done. He held the finished heatsink up to the light. It was a small, beautiful object, a complex lattice of fins and channels that looked more like a piece of alien jewelry than a computer component. He blew a stray fleck of ceramic dust from its surface and walked over to the humming racks of Echo. Warning: initiating hot swap protocol on an overloaded system is not recommended. "I'm not asking for your recommendation, Echo," Jaren murmured, his fingers flying across a keyboard. He initiated the shutdown sequence for Core Cluster 7. One of the server racks went dark, its fan spinning down with a soft sigh. The delicate surgery began. He unlatched the server case, the warm air inside smelling of hot silicon. He carefully removed the old, inefficient heatsink and replaced it with his new, custom-forged creation. It slid into place with a satisfying, perfect click. He sealed the rack, powered the cluster back on, and returned to the main console. The thermal warning on the screen vanished, replaced by a new line of text. Core Cluster 7 temperature stable at 38.5 degrees Celsius. Efficiency increased by 18.2%. Jaren allowed himself a small, tired smile. He took a long drink of his now cold coffee and stared at the screen. The frustration from Finch, the dismissal from Ben, it had all coalesced into this single moment. This was the point of no return. He began to type, his fingers moving with a slow, deliberate certainty. Run the final analysis. The deep dive. Cross-reference every data point we have. Push the pattern recognition to its absolute limit. I don't care about the power draw. I want proof. Warning. The text flashed on the screen. Such an analysis will require 98.7% of total system capacity. Do it, Jaren said, his voice quiet but firm. There was a pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then, a new line of text. Analysis initiated. The hum of the annex deepened, rising in pitch until it was a physical vibration in Jaren's bones. The lights in the room dimmed as power was shunted to the core processors. The hiss of the liquid nitrogen line became a steady, urgent roar. Jaren watched the main screen, his own reflection a ghostly image superimposed over the cascading streams of data. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something he had thought long dead. It wasn't hope. It was certainty. The certainty remained, but the adrenaline that had fueled his marathon of creation was finally beginning to ebb, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. A glance at the clock on his monitor told him it was nearly 3 a.m. He hadn't eaten since lunch, a fact his stomach was now protesting with a low, hollow ache. Estimated time to completion: 7 hours, 14 minutes, Echo displayed on a secondary screen as if reading his mind. 7 hours. He couldn't stand and watch the data scroll for 7 hours. He needed to recharge. He pushed himself away from the console and walked to a small, dented mini-fridge tucked under a workbench. Inside was the sad, familiar diet of a grad student on the brink: half a carton of milk, a questionable-looking container of leftover noodles, and a row of protein bars. He grabbed a bar and a bottle of water, the mundane act of sustenance a strange counterpoint to the cosmic work unfolding a few feet away. He ate the bar slowly, leaning against the workbench, the roar of Echo's systems a constant presence. He was a man on a tiny, self-made island, in the middle of a vast, computational ocean. He was waiting for a new world to be born from the digital surf. In the far corner of the annex, next to a stack of obsolete textbooks, was a lumpy, stained cot he'd salvaged from a dorm renovation. It was his concession to the demands of his own biology. He pulled a thin blanket over it and lay down, the springs groaning in protest. He stared up at the dark, pipe-strung ceiling, the blinking lights of the server racks reflecting in his eyes like distant, captive stars. He thought of Finch's warning, of Ben's casual dismissal. They saw him as a man chasing ghosts. But what if he was the one who was finally about to see? The steady, rhythmic hum of Echo's processors, the tireless engine of his own conviction, was the last thing he heard before exhaustion finally claimed him, pulling him down into unconsciousness. Attribution. This material was developed through a collaborative conversation between myself and Google Gemini.